Good evening. This is Mae Brussel. The title of this broadcast is World Watchers, and it's program number 721, September the 30th, 1985. For those of you that are familiar with my programs, have a pencil handy if you want to take some notes on names. And if you want the bibliography sheets that accompany each broadcast, send a self-addressed stamped envelope, Mae, M-A-E, Brussel, P.O. Box 22511, Carmel, California, 93922. I can also give you information on how to get the back broadcast or list of the back broadcast to fill in with some of the things that you might have missed the past 10 or 12 or 14 years. These broadcasts are available. Now, most of this evening, I'm going to talk about the Aryan Nations trial going on in Seattle. And in order to do that, I have to put aside about 60 top hunks of news, not 60 articles, but connecting pieces of information that are very valuable. I'm just going to run them down by title or subject with you to let you know I am collecting the material. All of it updates past programs that I've done with you, but I just don't want to divert myself too far apart from what I want to do this evening. So I'll list them as quickly as I can, a lot of the categories that I will be updating later. One is on the trial of Ali Ajah in Rome. They had a recess during the summer. He's back in good form. I didn't think he'd be this great. First thing he said was that the CIA and the Italian intelligence created this story about the intent to shoot the Pope coming from Bulgaria and the Soviet Union for the purposes of Cold War propaganda. Dr. Francesco Pazienza is making the news. There are wonderful articles. I've already outlined 3 of them ready to go for you on his trial. He's going to Italy now for trial on various charges there. He's been in New York in jail since March of this year, and recently there was a story in the New York Times, and part of the article mentioned that his co-terrorists Stefano Della Chaie and Oral Salik, C-E-L-I-K, were in Miami. Stefano is the one that helped set up the death squads and the active assassination teams in Italy and destabilized Italy and France with terror, and then moved down to South America and Central America. And Oral Salik, the man he was with in Miami, is the man named Ajah, who was at St. Peter's Square when the shooting of the Pope took place. There are trials going on in Argentina of the military, the generals and admirals. I want to share the activities and also the arrest of the military police bosses in Peru. The murder trial of people in the, I call it a murder trial, people in the military who were involved with the murder of Benigno Aquino in the Philippines are going to have their trial closed, just as we had our Warren Commission and our House Select Committee on Assassinations. They learned that you can spend 2 years investigating a murder and not have to tell anything about the truth. In fact, General Fabian Vera was invited to the Pentagon this week to a party for retired Joint Chief of Staff Mr. Vesey. And, the invitation came too early. The trial isn't over, but for all purposes, the trial's over and he's cleared. I've done a lot of work over the past several years on the American Security Council, and because of its close relationship, not only the people who killed John Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, and Martin Luther King, but its relationship to the National Security Council back to back, they're kissing cousins. I want to do that as soon as I can. A very good friend in Oregon has been sending me miles of material. I've got a mile long or mile high on Bhagwan, the Rajneesh up there, going way back, and she's also been sending me the past year all the material I've gotten on the order, the Aryan Nations, and I'll go into that story of the Guru. Many of you are getting some of the pieces of the story. There's a lot that I have to siphon through. It involves poison, vote fraud, murders, German money in Swiss bank accounts, $53 million that went off to Zurich, Haldol laced in beer, underground bunkers, drug traffic, and a lot more. There's terrible appointments that Ronald Reagan's been making, horrendous appointments. I wanted to go into some of those for you, including nomination of James Buckley as a federal appeal judge for 4 states in the East, just coming off hiring Nazis, reading the Elders of the Prodigal Zion on the U.S. Information Agency that he's been in charge of. That got him in good stead for the appointment of being a judge, I suppose. The trial of Kathy Smith and John Belushi murder is filled with a lot of important information. Her attorney, of course, is Mr. Weitzman, the same man who's simultaneously representing John DeLorean. And the Klaus Barbie trial has been delayed again. They can't do anything till they find the missing money of DeLorean. And they referred to international intrigue just today on the news. And the stalker case has moved from the El Paso murder, where the LAPD went to El Paso looking for somebody's eyeballs, to Melvin Belli, who is now visiting the stalker, Mr. Ramirez, in Los Angeles jail. Belli coming from Jack Ruby, the Errol Flynn family, Mrs. Herman Goering, and the Korean airline. A lot of interconnecting stories here. The trip of John Connolly with Richard Nixon, and John Connolly making shirt commercials with an eye patch. That's the most humorous thing, one of the most humorous stories I had this week. There's 1,000 ways for Ronald Reagan to get out of an arms agreement. I want to talk about the Hague in Netherlands, the World Court, and the stuff that's coming about the CIA wanting to overthrow Nicaragua. Very important story is the provocateur aspect of the Greenpeace ship. A friend sent me from the Boston Globe an editorial about that, and I have a long article on Lloyd Cutler representing Greenpeace. He comes out of the law offices with John J. McCloy, and is active with Richard Burt from Bonn, Germany, and Gustave d'Estaing and the Trilateral Commission. He was the man behind the Jimmy Carter administration. Lloyd Cutler is representing Greenpeace to destabilize Mitterrand and get Mitterrand out using the old intelligence community, just as when Jimmy Carter's in for 1 year, our spies and intelligence could even create a thing like the Iranian hostage crisis. It's very possible, considering the police and the work and the network they had in Iran, to make sure that Ronald Reagan, their boss in chief that the Klan and Nazis wanted in 1960, would be in power, and it's been documented their support of Ronald Reagan. The Greenpeace story, the story behind it, is very, very important. And then I have about 60 more stories on Brazil, since we last discussed Brazil, and it ties into laboratories and the disease AIDS and the bee, the killer bee, and drugs, and the Syrian connection, the narcotics linked to Henry Arsan, and the P2 scandals. The international network of Nazis and narcotics seems to be right there in Sao Paulo, Brazil, and very important now. I want to update Bernard Goetz, the fellow that shot 4 blacks in the New York subway. His trial will be coming up soon. His links to Liberty Lobby, the Aryan nations, possibly, and even higher up than that, some material that we're looking into. I have people looking into it, and I've been working on. The LAPD has released the papers of Marilyn Monroe. Paul Laxalt has 57 helpers with a lawsuit against the Sacramento Bee. One of the big funders behind him is Mo Dallas. He's trying to prove he has links to organized crime. Mo Dallas of La Costa, formerly of Las Vegas, is one of the people funding Paul Laxalt, as is Ivan Boesky, a board member from the Wiesenthal Center. And there are a lot of media changes in the UPI being sold, and David Murdoch buying 20th Century Fox. David Murdoch having the Pope as a columnist for his newspaper, Bring the Vatican into the daily papers, and Admiral Moore's role on the Liberty ship that the Israelis bombed. There are a lot of symptoms of closing in on Israel and prominent Jews at this time, and I want to go into those as these little heads and faces of anti-Semitism, the real Nazi network, surfaces away from those street scenes and provocateurs. The World Anti-Communist League had their annual conference in in Dallas, and I want to update the people there and what exactly is the World Anti-Communist League. I've done some reports on that, and I want to do more. And Phil Donahue had John Singlaub on TV just this morning, as a matter of fact, Singlaub saying he doesn't know the Unification Church at all. I'm glad I taped it. And Robert Brown, a soldier of fortune, had his annual convention up in Las Vegas. Those are the places where you meet G. Gordon Liddy from Watergate fame. Liddy was in the FBI and the Treasury Department. And Gordon Novell, who helped blow the DeLorean case, and he's out of the Permindex operation, named in the Torbett document for his role having a part with the co-conspirators in the murder of Kennedy. There are a lot of big stories and other that I'm not going to list for you now. Just take these 10 minutes to tell you. There's a lot of news. I'm aware of it. Thank you for sending material, books. I'm collecting and working literally around the clock because all of these stories are coming together, and they're very important. Before I get on to the Aryan nations, I just want to briefly mention a story in the New York Times. Pentagon acts on General Dynamics director, and it's about a man named Lester Crown, a member of the board of General Dynamics. Now, they've been under fire for their overcosts in their ships where they charge too much money and so forth. But the gist of this story is something different. Mr. Crown the family owns 8.9 million shares, 21% of General Dynamics. And Henry Crown, his father, was the active Crown member, along with his younger son, at the time that John Kennedy was killed 21 years ago. And they had a very important part, the General Dynamics and the Crowns, in the assassination role, the setup of the network in Dallas, Texas, that killed John Kennedy. And Albert Jenner, the attorney for General Dynamics for the Crown family, became a member of the Warren Commission. Now, just this week, the Pentagon wants to take away the security clearance of Mr. Crown, 60 years old, the influential behind-the-scenes figure in the company's general strategy with the government. The excuse was that they're tightening security clearances because of the following the Navy spy scandal in the spring. Well, the Navy spy scandal involved Mr. Walker, and Mr. Walker was in the Navy recruiting Ku Klux Klan when he was in the Navy and working with Mr. Wilkinson, the Grand Dragon of the Klan. And they're not making much fuss about Walker's Klan connections, although it's come out in the news a few times and Wilkinson talking about. But the person whose security clearance is being taken away is a Jewish person, and Marvin Warner of the Ohio banks, who got in trouble when those banks began collapsing, claimed that he was the front for Gentile bankers, and they singled him out because he was Jewish. And in this case, the security clearance is being taken away from Mr. Crown, who still builds the ships. And I believe that there's a touch or a lot of anti-Semitism in here. But the important thing about this article goes on to say that Kathleen Buck of the Pentagon Legal Counsel, is taking away the security clearance of Mr. Crown. The excuse was that in 1974 he contributed a fund from General Dynamics to members of the Illinois legislature, and that he pleaded got immunity from prosecution, and gave testimony about the people who had received his own money. But then Kathleen Buck from the Pentagon goes on to say she acknowledged that the Defense Industrial Security Clearances Office had investigated the bribery in 1983, decided to continue his clearance, but under new guidelines he can't have his clearance anymore because of the recent spy scandal in the Navy. This is the first time I've ever seen in print DISC, Defense Industry Security. I always call it the Defense Industry Security Command, because the document written by David Copeland, an attorney in the Southwest, called the Torbett document, that was his nom de plume, was the layout and structure of the people behind the murder of John Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, and Martin Luther King, specifically John Kennedy. And this book is filled with information about Roy Cohn and Lionel Corporation. Those two are in the news too. A lot of single items that I'm going to update that connect to the Kennedy assassination. But the Torbett document names the Crown family, Henry Crown, General Dynamics, throughout the whole document as being a front for the assassination group under the umbrella group called DISC, D-I-S-C, Defense Industrial Security Clearance. They call it DISC. Now, you may correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know if any of you researchers or listeners have ever seen that department. A lot of people discredited the Torbett document's accuracy because they heard of the Defense Intelligence Agency or the AID, but we're not familiar with DISC. And that organization, according to the Torbett document, is to screen people to make sure they have a clearance to work for the defense industry, for the atomic weapons and missiles. So this is the first time I've seen DISC, and has been used along with the name of Mr. Crown, so that the Torbett document talks about DISC and talks about Crown. If any of you have ever seen it before in print or in a government directory, let me know. I haven't been able to see that the organization, but here it is. And for those of you that have often questioned the Torbett document, I do see the letters here, and there is an organization, and that's the organization under which Mr. Crown has lost his security clearance. Now I want to get on to the Aryan nations and the trial up north, but what you see up there, and what I'm going to discuss, is a group of people. 11 people are on trial. 11 people pleaded guilty, and one person is still at large. His name is Richard Scutari. He's at large. And this is not the end of the Nazi Party. I'm going to talk about a bigger and larger group, and the way that the bigger and larger group gets funded is not through bank robberies or shopping malls and so forth. The Wall Street Journal has a story, September 25th, shadowy spending, military secrecy rises, with Pentagon hiding billions of its outlays. And the article says there's a black hole growing inside the federal government, and it's pulling in billions of dollars a year, and it uses an example like Lockheed. And you see, Lockheed and General Dynamics have taken Pentagon dollars, and they've used them to create, through organizations like DISC, Defense Industry Security, their own government that is funded with billions and billions of dollars for political assassinations, for cover-ups, and the murders, the payoff of people, whether it's the news media, the prominent people that you see in front of your big screen, or the newspaper, book publishers, and so forth. Millions of dollars that adds up to billions is hidden. And that started, under the Hughes organization and Lockheed, and this is where this money comes from for the kinds of people I'm going to talk about. Now, many of you have read the articles that are coming out from the trial up in Seattle, Washington. Just to give you an example of the breadth of the articles, I already have 1 month's supply. The trial actually began the first week in September, and this is the end of September. Just 2 out of maybe 60 articles I have given me this much information to share with you, and some I've done before about the Aryan nations and the order, and I'll continue. The order became part of national attention December the 7th when Robert Matthews was killed. He was the head of an inner circle. He was fighting for control with another guy named Pierce, who took over after Matthews was killed. So far, they have people from the inside team giving information in return for immunity. One of them is Denver Daw Parmenter II. The other is Bruce Pierce. And the third is a man named Thomas Allen Martinez, a very important person, a key person to this whole story, who, because of his acts, makes the links of the order to the Aryan nation as if it wasn't always there before. It was, but right from the beginning of this trial, that becomes evident. They planned to kill a federal judge in Texas, in Tyler, Texas. The purpose of the order, or they also have other names that we'll go into, the Silent Brotherhood, and a list of about 7 names. They're all the same and the same people. The plot is to foment a revolution in the United States to overthrow the United States government. They would finance it by counterfeiting and armed robberies. And you may think it's very silly to counterfeit, but the role model for counterfeiting was made up by Adolf Hitler and Martin Bormann. From 1943 to the end of the war, they perfected counterfeiting as a legitimate operation, putting money in Swiss banks. This is probably today buying up our corporations and Hollywood studios and so forth. Through a lot of this, it was set aside and tested, and wouldn't go through the test as being counterfeit. It had passed, and they went ahead and made lots of this money to destabilize this country and England after the war. The crimes that these people have been charged with, the ones that pleaded guilty and the ones on trial, there's a racketeering charge, which is a large umbrella group. It includes robbery, bank robbery, homicide, counterfeiting, plans to overthrow the government, to kill all Jews in this country, to kill blacks and minorities, and there's a list of 67 different crimes. David Tate, one of this group, is going to face a trial alone separately in Missouri for killing a state trooper. Mr. Martinez was arrested for counterfeiting, buying 2 lottery tickets with a counterfeit $10 story that broke this whole case open, that I'll go to at great length. 4 members of the order have been charged with murdering Alan Berg, the radio newscaster in Denver, Colorado, with their silenced machine gun. And 4 members of this group have been charged with murdering Walter West, and a informer, part of their own group that they killed. Now, they were planning to kill Thomas Martinez, and they hired someone to kill him. The Aryan nations paid $1,800 for what they believed they were getting a headless body, pictures of a headless body. And Eden Cutler was arrested. He accepted the $1,800 he was going to give it to a federal agent, give that money to a federal agent to kill Thomas Martinez, and he was brought in, and he's going to have a separate trial for hiring somebody to kill. Now, the money goes from the bank robbery, $3.5 million. Some of it goes to Nazi and Klan all around the United States. One person is Bob Miles from Michigan, his Identity Church in Michigan. The other is in North Carolina, Jesse Helm State, to the Klan leader there, Glenn Miller, not the musician, the late musician, the Ku Klux Klan in North Carolina. There's a woman living in Santa Cruz who said her father was a member of the Klan in North Carolina, and she saw him killing children and burying them, and she says that he was linked to the Atlanta murders. But this is a Klan in North Carolina. Texas, they gave part of this $3.5 million to Louis Beam to buy a computer that would connect the Klans and Nazis. In Missouri, it went to a particular church, Dan Gaiman, the leader of the Identity Church. Money went to William Pierce, who wrote the Turner Diaries for the National Alliance in Virginia, the blueprint for taking over the United States. He's one of the military connection to this group, having worked for the Air Force. He's a PhD physicist, worked for United Technologies, and then on to the Nazi Party in Virginia. Took over from Rockwell's party over in Virginia. The same Rockwell whose name was in Lee Harvey Oswald's notebook. The money went to Nazis for traveling, or along with others in Denver, Colorado. They must have stayed in the safe houses, and also for their compound, the Aryan Nations, up in Idaho. Now, Mr. Martinez, Thomas Allen Martinez, who's testifying against these people, was caught in Philadelphia buying 2 tickets to the lottery for $10. And the feds came upon him and realized, or caught, that, well, this is their cover story, that the money was counterfeit. I can't imagine in a crime city like Philadelphia how you pick up 10 measly dollars. It's like finding pennies on the street for 2 lottery tickets when money flows so quickly through those organizations. But the excuse for using Mr. Martinez as an informer against this group was that he was caught with the counterfeiting money. So in order to get off this very serious crime of the $10 counterfeit, he told the police and FBI about a fanatic group out in the coast who are on a crime spree, who plan a revolution, and the government persuaded him to be an agent. Martinez went to Oregon. He was arrested in June, and in Oregon he went to Portland, and he was in a motel in November of 1984 when the federal agents closed in, and Robert Matthews of the Order was there, and he shot a federal agent in the leg, didn't kill him, and escaped. He shot him just in the leg, and then went up to Whidbey Island, stayed at safe houses all the way up at Puget Sound, and then 200 state and federal officers closed in December the 7th, 1984, and burned down the house with Mr. Matthews. So what you get is a $10 counterfeit in Philadelphia that leads to a shot in the leg in Oregon that leads to 200 agents burning a house down up in Washington State. Now, in Oregon, at the hotel, the other members of the Order referred to Mr. Martinez as one of their group, but they called him the man in room 14 because that's the room number he stayed in, and they suspected that he was the man who called the feds, who had the shootout that caused Matthews, the leader, to respond, shoot in the leg, and run. And so they carried photos of Mr. Martinez and put him in publications, the Nazi publications. And at that point, they asked Eden Cutler, the security chief for Aryan Nations, to put out $1,800 to kill Martinez. Now, the Order is a splinter group that is not, it's supposed to be separate, or when you read some stories, they want you to think this Order is separate from the Aryan Nations. It's no more separate from the Aryan Nations than the Soldier of Fortune is separate from our National Security Council. The security chief for the Aryan Nations, that's Richard Butler, was the one who put up the $1,800 for the decapitation. Now, the Aryan Nations by Butler was set up in 1972. He came from Southern California. Butler worked at Lockheed Aircraft in Burbank with Thane Caesar, the gentleman that killed Robert Kennedy. He worked on the U-2 planes, as did Lee Harvey Oswald, in the Philippines and in Japan. He became a minister, as did Reverend Gale when he came home from the Philippines. And these men have direct links to the murder of John Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, Martin Luther King, and Clay Shaw in New Orleans. So the security for Aryan Nations was paying for the decapitation of a man who worked with the Order. Therefore, there's no separation, and never has been, of course, between the order and the Aryan nations, but one does the job on people and tries to keep an arm's distance, but if anybody touches a member of the order, then the Aryan nations pays to have the assailant to the order killed. So there is that bond and friendship that's pretty close in more ways than I can go into. Right now, I have in the past and will continue more in the present. Now, the New York Times and the Monterey Herald had a story, a picture in the New York Times, page Y11, Friday, September 27th, white supremacists to testify. And there's a picture of William Soderquist, Soderquist, a former member. They're always former members, but he's one of those 22 of the militant sect of the Order, talking with Assistant United States Attorney Bob Ward outside the federal court in Seattle. Mr. Soderquist agreed to testify with immunity from prosecution against 10 members of the group who are still on trial for racketeering. He testified he believed the Jews are the enemy of the white race. Mr. Soderquist comes from Salinas, California. I looked up, he's not listed in the telephone book, but we have his group, the National Alliance, the National Vanguard, here in Salinas. He's a white supremacist who's copping out, looks like a college, out of Yale or Harvard, his V-neck shirt and clean-cut guy going off with the U.S. attorney smiling, and he's going to talk about the other group. Now, the connections of Salinas and the Monterey sheriffs, I'm going to get into in 1 second, but I just want to cite two more articles that are coming out from the trial of the Order right now. One is from the San Jose Mercury, September the 24th, racist group probed about break-in, and it tells about a break-in that took place at the Aryan Nations in 1983. They're discussing that now. A man named Howard J. Witherwax was saying that somebody broke into their offices in 1983. Witherwax is the security chief of the Aryan Nations of Richard Butler. He's the son-in-law of Reverend Richard Butler of the Aryan Nations. The Order has been described as the militant part of this church. Witherwax is a former deputy sheriff from California, and he's talking and testifying up there about somebody breaking into their offices. The California law enforcement is filled with the Nazis, the Klans. Just recently, a San Francisco police van or wagon had swastikas and Nazi poster in there. I mentioned it before, and Dianne Feinstein wasn't too concerned. These sheriffs belong to these white racist organizations with a vow to overthrow the United States government, but in the meantime, they're holding jobs in the Pentagon and in the police department, in the sheriff's department, and this one is that's testifying at the trial now. The son-in-law of Richard Butler was a California sheriff. Now, one more article here about the Order before I get into the Salinas branch. This is from Oregon, my friend in Oregon, who sent it to me. The Order witness traces the Klan's links in their search for weapons. Part of the testimony that came out, this is September the 18th, 1985, the Order's $4 million that they got from their bank robberies was given to groups such as the Klan or to finance a research program that would give the organization a high-tech arsenal of laser weapons and mind control chemicals. And a member of the group testified. Denver Daw Parmenter is one of those three that I mentioned so far that have testified. Parmenter talked about another member of the Order, Dan Brower, who made acquaintances with scientists working on high-tech weapons that the organization felt it could use. This is mind control and chemicals, just as I said, that the Bagua, the Rajneesh in Oregon have been working on mass mind control, salmonella, food poisoning, germ warfare. These people are working on chemicals and laser weapons. They also wanted to buy LAW rockets, light anti-tank weapon rockets, to use in armored car heists. The rockets essentially are disposable shoulder-fired missiles similar to bazookas. So the importance of this one article, the Oregonian, September 18th, is that they refer to one of their Aryan brothers and laud him, of course, for his great work, and they refer to Joseph Paul Franklin. That's the fellow that killed 2 blacks in Utah and blew up a synagogue in Tennessee, and who also admitted in 1984 that he's the fellow who shot Larry Flint and paralyzed him. And that's how I met Larry Flynt when I wanted to write a story about Larry McDonald and the people close to him, Stoner and Franklin. Those were the people that had paralyzed him, and I knew they were linked to Larry McDonald, who went down in the Korean airline. So just this past week, a story linking Franklin to the Aryan nations. One of their brothers came out, and also in terms of the weapons, chemical weapons, biological warfare. I'll take a 1-minute break and go back now, or go forward to other stories on the National Socialist Party and the Nazi Party. But just in the last 3 weeks since this trial began, there are literally dozens and dozens of articles with information and links to a lot of other cases. As I say, we'll take a 1-minute break, and then I'll come back and do some more on the local Salinas group that are really behind the power of these organizations. This is Mae Brussel, and this is part 2 of World Watchers, the second half hour of a weekly program, discussing news events, and in this particular case this week, the Aryan Nations, the trial going on in Seattle, Washington, involving a group called The Order, a split-off of the Aryan Nations, but part of it. They're not separate, actually, except that if one gets caught doing the violence, they hope to be separated from the other, but the other is plenty violent themselves, now having been mentioned in the recent court cases as having hired for decapitations and other things, and also their goal is planned genocide, so I don't see how you can get more violent than that. And these people are not separate from all the other work I've done into the vast organizational network on various continents of people with the same intentions and goals. Now, if you send to a publication, it's called New Pages Press, P.O. Box 438, Grand Blanc, BLANC, Michigan, 48349. You can send for a newsletter. It comes out 3 times a year with information on new books and magazines that are out. And issue number 9, their spring and summer of 1985, has a list of 23 organizations, right-wing organizations, not separate from each other. And there are many more besides that, but the top 23 in the United States that have printed publications about their Nazi intentions, their love of Senator Joe McCarthy, their adherence with the goals of the Ku Klux Klan, their participation with the American Nazi Party that changed its name to the National Socialist, the Alliance, and they are not separated. As I say, they have different titles, but they're not separated from their common goals for a white nation and a country of white people. And you can send for the list of the publications with their name, address, and what the stated goals of the organizations are, and fill in that information. For 22 cents, you can get all of that, so I'm not going to spend 2 or 3 hours reading it to you on the air. The subscription rate is $12 for 6 issues, and you might want to get the New Pages Press, as I say, out of Grand Blanc, Michigan. Now, among the 23 organizations listed, the 24th is a group called the National Socialist Vanguard in Salinas, California, P.O. Box 5035, and it describes their periodical and how it's different from the others or how it's similar. And it says the first issue of their periodical clearly lays out the origin and goal of the National Socialist Vanguard. The group was founded in 1981, that's 4 years ago, by individuals who were dissatisfied with the shortcomings of the existing white racist organizations. Their basic strategy of the group grew out of a seminal publication and of right-wing groups such as Mein Kampf and This Is the World, but with a significant economic aspect. They are self-supporting, they're not parasitic, feeding off the efforts of their supporters, such as the recipients, the Klan, and the white racist group that get money from the Aryan nations thanks to their multi-million bank robberies, and it's disseminated to them. The National Socialist Vanguard is trying to create profit-making businesses among the white racist community, and they have a map of the United States to show where Jews and Puerto Ricans, Cubans, blacks, and Asians have settled. They want white, unpolluted areas, and they're building their own security barracks and offices, and they have a service trade enterprises complex. It's called the Service Trade Enterprises, STE, and that according to their articles, they said this is for their business activities. and they tell you about their head of the Mr. Cooper, who travels, Rick Cooper, and visited various radical right-wing groups around the United States. This particular report on the National Socialist Vanguard illustrates that when Mr. Cooper traveled, he didn't see William Pierce of the National Alliance and the publisher of the National Vanguard, David Duke of the National Association Advancement of White People, or go to George or visit Matt Cole's New Order. They stay away from those visibly seen Klan, the Grand Dragons, the people that tried to invade Dominica and failed, the people that shot Alan Berg and Rob Banks. This group is separate, very much separate, and very elite, but they have different ways of doing things, but they are very important to the whole context of the Aryan nations up north and what came down in the trials taking place now. Now, in the National Socialist Vanguard that came out, the issue July to September 1984, they had a warning in that issue that stated, "We have received word that the federal government is planning a major sting operation against the Klan and Nazi terrorists." They don't call themselves the Nazis or terrorists, even though their hero, and I'll read it to you, is Adolf Hitler, their mentor. But there's a sting operation against the Klan and Nazi terrorists in collaboration with the Anti-Defamation League of B'nai B'rith, going under the name of the Secret Army Organization or the Silent Brotherhood or a similar label, which is the Order and the Silent Brotherhood. This comes out in the trials up north and before. It is under the auspices of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearm and or the FBI, and is designed to entrap naive and unsuspecting racial activists. The procedure is for the government agents to approach a prospect with an offer of several $100s in deposit money, whereupon he's told to await further instructions, presumably of an illegal nature involving bombing and assassinations. And once they accept the money, he is hooked. He is guilty of an indictable offense as part of the illegal conspiracy, the preferred method of the government for putting racial activists out of business. The policy of the National Socialist Vanguard has always been quite clear. We remain completely legal organization. They're planning the overthrow of the United States government through a legal way. We're a legal organization. We don't engage in illegal activity, even though, as I'll read to you, their hero is Adolf Hitler, and they want this country to be a totalitarian country, even though we have a legal constitution here. We are legal. We don't engage in illegal activity of any kind. Our task is to win the hearts and minds of people and not terrorism. So the point is that the National Socialist Vanguard knew in the fall of 1984 that there was going to be an arrest of the Order, and they therefore have to have, and this person of the National Socialist Vanguard has contacts at the highest echelon of government. Now, this Mr. Thomas Martinez was arrested in Philadelphia in 84 in June with that $10 counterfeit. He became an FBI informant in June. In July, this typewritten newsletter is sent out to the National Socialists, dated July to September, saying there is going to be arrest. Be careful. The Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms is setting up a sting to get these particular Nazis. Now, when I wrote the SLA as the CIA, that was in 1974, 11 years ago, a lot of people still don't understand, even after they read it, how the federal government set it up there, even though I had it very, very clear. And here's a case of a National Socialist saying there's going to be a sting of other Nazis. We're going to stay out of their area and have our own business. And then in November of 84, in room 14, is Mr. Martinez, who from June set it up, but in between they knew, the fellows in Salinas knew and others people knew, of the confrontation of Matthews where he shoots the FBI man, and then in December he is killed. And then later, the Aryan nations are paying to kill Martinez, the man that the FBI have used. So there's a round circle of using one man, letting him get caught in there, then they were going to kill him. Now I'm going to read to you from the newsletter of the National Vanguard, the National Socialist Vanguard out of Salinas. I won't give you the names of the people on the newsletter because they live here and are in business on the peninsula, but everything else that I can read in this half hour or 20 minutes I'm going to share with you. This is a report. It says, since its inception 3 years ago, This is in September 74. It came out July to September. The National Socialist Vanguard, in conjunction with its business enterprise, ST, it's called Special ST Enterprises. I think that's for Stormtroopers Enterprises Incorporated. We've come a long way. I feel our growth and progress has matched the near 20-year growth of our political counterparts. 1964 was 20 years. That was exactly when John Kennedy was killed, by December 63. And people directly attached to the Aryan nations and the order had a role with those people involved in the killing and cover-up of John Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, Martin Luther King. But we'll stick to John Kennedy for these purposes because that's when the coup took place in November of 63. And by 2 days later, we're in the Vietnam War with an escalation. By 64, these people are on their way towards having Richard Nixon and Ronald Reagan as their presidents and to represent their, what they call the freedom fighters, the term coming out of Nazi Germany and put into business by the OSS, then the CIA, the freedom fighters. Now, the fellow writing this newsletter is saying in the 20 years, he's telling you they're connected to something that's 20 years old, but they're just 4 years old. He says the dedication and the abilities of our personnel has been responsible for the growth. We'd like to introduce you to our directors and a series of personnel profiles, the shakers and movers of our organization. So this newsletter is about one particular person in charge of the business of the National Socialist Vanguard and their business, the ST Enterprises. And he describes his background, home of record in Oregon, later in Salinas, and self-employed in 1974, U.S. Army retired. Now, before I list you all of his qualifications, and as I say, the purpose of these people is a long-range goal linked to a national organization. They refer to the national. There's a letter of commendation of one of these people that just one man, I'm talking about all the credits and credentials to this one man, go to the business manager in Salinas. And he's writing this newsletter, and I'll go into his political achievements if I have time, but I want to read you part of the newsletter before I get to his background. By my own admission, as well as by the opinion of my closest co-workers, I find that my basic personality traits are dogged stubbornness, goal and mission-oriented, and often arrogant and belligerent. I do have a deep love and concern for my people, and my inherent stubbornness is a heartfelt determination to complete and specific projects involved with the successful completion of Wolfstadt. WOLFSDAT is to be headquarters in all of the states, one central headquarters, like in 50 states, as I understand the description or the news analysis, with their own water, their own power, their own electricity, and their own federal postal stations, which are just about into place and will be ready by 1986 is their goal date. It says they have specific projects involved. We want to develop other goals and projects to support and maintain Wolfstadt. I have little or no tolerance for any philosophy other than the full program of the National Socialists. I feel I have the maturity, the training, the education, and ability to serve my people and the cause of Adolf Hitler in a position of trust and leadership, at least until a better qualified or more highly motivated person steps forward with abilities greater than my own. At that time, I will fully support and assist my successor to the fullest extent of my abilities. I understand my responsibilities to the National Socialist Movement, which is the Nazi Party, and to the people of my race, which is the white race, and the requirements and the abilities of being in a position of trust in the party of our leader, Adolf Hitler. I'm fully aware that the National Socialist doctrine is based on the leadership principle. It is totalitarian, having no tolerance for any other form of government or political activity, and regardless of personal contribution to the party, the very best member of the race will become the new leader of the party and the National Socialist Movement worldwide. So it has a 20-year background. This is a fairly new form, and now a description of the Wolfstadt, or Wolf State, WOLFSTADT, as I said. We are pleased to announce the major underground projects we have completed. We have our own sewer system that is finished after a considerable amount of hassle. It was finally approved. We have a pumping station and completed. The central well is completed. The project ended up costing more than we thought, and it goes into the amount of money. Call it overkill if you want. What we wanted, the water well went 835 feet. It added a secondary pumping station. The project is in excess of $11,000. We have completed a quarter-mile section of rail fencing. Underground work is being done with posts. The Public Utilities District is building power lines now. We have contracted and paid for power drop, power terminal on the property. This gives us electricity for power tools, all we need for the pending above-ground construction. Bring in power, another hefty expense. We will own the power supply in the entire area. And once the basic work is underway, they're building a road sign named in honor of Richard Johansson, a San Francisco unit of the San Francisco Nazi Party, the National Socialist Party, up in San Francisco, who was killed in the line of duty somewhere. He was in a car accident, and they've not in the line of duty of Nazis, but in the Nazi business. It says we have a county seat now. We have been initiated, Woolstat, with banking and the necessary services, and a postal service has been initiated. The ST Enterprises, they don't give the zip code or the area code number, but they give a description of this group. Now, the background of this man who is sworn to Hitler, just briefly and as fast as I can, just some of the things I'll read. Army Administration at Fort Ord, Personnel Management at Ben Harrison, Indiana, Non-Commissioned Officers Academy at Fort Ord, Fort Bennington, Georgia, Military Leadership School, Fort Lewis, Washington, Basic Training, Fort Ord, Cavalry Blacksmithing, Fort Knox, Kentucky, University of Maryland and Business Associates, Psychology at Salinas Hartnell College, Armed Forces Unit General Education, also in Kashini, Japan, University of Oklahoma Leadership Training, Law Enforcement in Los Angeles, California, Police Officer Standards in San Francisco, Police Academy, Motorcycle and Vehicle Driving Course, California Highway Patrol Academy, Scuba Diving, Tacoma, Washington, Salvage Diving in Seattle, Washington, a Certified Carpet Restoration Specialist in Fresno, California, training for political education with a Nazi Party, Leadership School in Arlington, Virginia, and military training, First Sergeant in the United States at Fort Ord, Special Training Year with Drill Sergeants, was an enlisted advisor of the Second Republic of Korea, where he had to serve then under Fritz Kramer and with John Singlab and General MacArthur and all those wonderful people that make up the Soldier of Fortune right now, and the highly becoming visible members of the Contras, directing the World Anti-Communist League and attending with Robert Brown, the Soldier of Fortune conferences, his annual conventions, and also very much a part of the literature of the gung-ho survivalist Soldier of Fortune team. Awards and decorations: Meritorious Service Medal, a Bronze Star Medal, Army Commendation Medal with Oak Leaf Cluster, 7 awards of Good Conduct Medal, Vietnam Service Medal, Army Expeditionary Medal, Vietnam Campaign Medal, 3 Battle Stars, Non-Commissioned Officers Academy Service Medal, Overseas Medal, Republic of Vietnam Medal with Palm, National Defense Service Medal, Presidential Citation, Meritorious Unit Citation, 2 Oak Leaf Clusters, Republic of Korea, Presidential Unit Citation, Expert Badge, the .45 pistol, Expert Badge, the M1 rifle, Expert Badge, M14 rifle, Expert Badge, the carbine, the 5.6 rifle, for Federal Republic of Germany, the Military Sharpshooter Medal over in Germany, Letters of Appreciation, Commendation, Principal Military Duties, involved area in Vietnam, 3 armed conflicts, Korea military junta, Dominican Republic, and then Vietnam again, assigned in every state of the Union and in 81 foreign countries in 6 years of reserve duty, 20 years of active federal service in the U.S. Cavalry. Employment record: worked as a carnival roustabout at age 13, warehouse, United Professional Soldier at 19, deputy sheriff in the Monterey County, and see, another sheriff from California is the son-in-law of Richard Butler of Aryan Nations, the Butler formerly of Lockheed. Operations officer at Wells Fargo Bank, and I've cited them in terms of the Smith trial and all the confrontation of the 400 or 500 million, and said Wells Fargo was a conduit of spy money and espionage a long time back. I don't know what he did there, but the Wells Fargo and the Bank of America and the Boston Bank have been used for all kinds of shady deals, just as the military establishment in their contracts goes out to relate to people all over the country that aren't the visible Nazis on trial up there in Seattle, but are bigger. Social and fraternal memberships, the Nazi Party in El Monte, the Nazi Party in San Francisco. In February 1974, a group leader of the Northern District in 1980, the Salinas Ramblers Motorcycle, the Monterey Bay Road Riders Motorcycle Club, the 1st Cavalry Division Association, the American Legion, American National Federation of Independent Business, Salinas Chamber of Commerce, Better Business Bureau, the Fraternal Order of the Police in Monterey County, Society of Cleaning Technicians, Tacoma Freelance Underwater Driving Club, American Motorcycle Association, Athletic Achievements, and it goes into track and wrestling and amateur boxer, and also the black belt learned in martial arts at the Kyungbuk University in Korea, 6 hours daily that taught him to become, as he says, aggressive and competitive. Political achievements, and he lists his work with the Nazi Party in El Monte, California, and San Francisco, California, and worked with Commander Kohl, the Nazi, upon my return from Germany in February of 1974. Now, Commander Kohl of the Nazi Party was in San Francisco and Oakland at the time that Dr. Marcus Foster set off the whole SLA story. Another ATF, CIA, or federal organization set up the SLA, the whole group of them, Donald DeFreeze and the LAPD. But Commander Kohl was in the Bay Area when Dr. Marcus Foster was shot with a cyanide bullet. His friend was shot with a regular bullet. The black man got the cyanide and the white survived. He was with the Nazi Party group, an officer in February 75-76 up north, and the Northern California district then from 78 to 80. National Socialist Award, promotion to Stormtrooper, team leader, group leader, Stormtrooper Wound Award for injuries received during major street battle, September 26, 1977, in the streets of California, San Francisco. The Adolf Hitler 10-year service medal, the Adolf Hitler Leadership Medal, accelerated to the NSV, that's the National Socialist Vanguard. Banker director appointed a NSV-ST, which is the Stormtrooper. Business director in California, secretary of ST Enterprises, which is their business enterprises. And that is a little bit of the forming of the person with all these honors from the American military and all these positions in cavalry, in business, in psychology, in the bank, and very, very skilled. And it is this person who was giving the warning that they're going to catch those guys up north who had word from the inside team. Now, the training, the boxing, the karate, the shoeing of horses, the cavalry, the athletic skills, the motorcycle skills, the scuba diving. This is a person trained in psychology, sociology, real estate, political science, an avowed love and following the course of Adolf Hitler, an inroad into who was going to be arrested, and he named the organization from the July newsletter. Between July and September it came out, and he named that silent order, that brotherhood up there, trained in all kinds of armed forces activities in Germany, in Korea, in Vietnam, in Dominican Republic, working in the Monterey County Sheriff's, and then, of course, this strange thing, he learns a skill, a business skill, carpet procedure and carpet cleaning, so he can come into your home and clean carpets. And also, I wonder, when you call people in to repair, whether it's the copying machine or the carpets and so forth, what in the world are you getting that when you let people into your home? They also, at the trial up north, brought out the very first day how they instructed these people to be very nice and talk nicely to black people, and those are the people that they're going to hang and kill as soon as they can. Now, in the business update, he also has this in the letter. At this point in time, our business ventures continue to prosper. We are maintaining a stable posture during this reporting in anticipation of imminent relocation in the Eastern Empire. Now, whether that's a code, imminent relocation in the Eastern Empire, whether it means we're going to make war in the East with the evil empire, I don't know. Because if you're setting up these offices in all these states and you're telling people to go to the Pacific Northwest, that's not the Eastern Empire. But the business letter says, in anticipation of our imminent relocation to the Eastern Empire. This relocation has been a little slow due to administrative circumstances over which we have no control. However, we currently have a fixed plan in escrow with a closing date of October 16th, 1984. This is 6 weeks later than we hoped, within our schedule for completion of our essential projects. Now, they bring up something about the Salinas School District and the Mexican employees, which I don't quite understand, but the newsletter said, we did lose out on our anticipated contracts with the Salinas School District due to later running of the Migrant Education Summer School and a much earlier start in the school year. Now, they must use the Salinas schools, the public schools, for the Nazi meetings for the National Socialist Vanguard, because they said the school year is different. It's starting early, so they have more Easter, and it's going a little later. So we did lose out our anticipated contract with the school district due to the running of the migrant education program. This early school start is to allow the Mexican school children a longer Christmas and a longer Easter vacation at home in Mexico. Now that's interesting because the farm workers here, the ones that I've seen in Salinas, and there's a lawsuit in our paper this week about people being hired from Mexico and living in holes in the mud and calling that a home. He says they go longer Christmas and Easter at home in Mexico. Furthermore, the school districts now have requirements to hire or contract with minority-owned or operated businesses from this point forward. Though we will miss the much-needed revenue, we will still be able to complete our scheduled projects within the established goals with a little more difficulty. So the California educational system is funding the National Socialist Vanguard in some way when they are stating that their entire goal in life is to put in a totalitarian dictatorship, which is completely contradictory to what is going on in the educational system of what people would be learning. If a man says, I have maturity, training, education, ability to serve my people and the cause of Adolf Hitler, then what in the heck are they doing renting public schools in the summer to further the cause of Adolf Hitler? And if they're in a position to make their National Socialist movement worldwide and to work for the National Socialist doctrine based on the principleship of totalitarianism with no tolerance for any form of government or political activity, then what in the heck are they using these school areas for, I wonder? Then in the report, the last note on business is to report that we have completed our professional training course to make us the best at what we do. We completed the restoration certification course sponsored by Workmaster Corporation. That is not to say all the training will end. It will, but simply we completed our educational requirements for our trades. We will continue refresher training, keep up with change and new trends in order to stay ahead of the competition. Now, this is the group that does not like one group of white races depending upon the other. They don't want William Pierce to get money from the bank robberies. They allegedly don't want the funds of these groups or the scandals that come with making these funds linking to them, because the others, by doing these various bank robberies, which have been quite successful, many millions are raised, and there are very few people in jail. The great train robbery was Otto Skorzeny, the largest hunk of money that came out of one single train robbery. A very interesting book that went right down to Brazil and into the hands of the Nazis in Brazil. The upper echelon has a large, wide range for the goals of Adolf Hitler that stays removed from those people doing the bank robberies, but the bank robberies share that money at the lower level and spread it around. So this is a group that are in Salinas, California, who are very well organized and very intelligent and very honored by the government. And just this last week, a member of the order, the Aryan Nations, was photographed all the way into the New York Times. It made, not just our paper out here, a member from Salinas, and this group are admitting that they want chemical, biological warfare, mind control, poisons, rockets, and will raise money through massive robberies. there are these two elements that I want to separate for you here. One is the profile of the person who says, I'm working very hard and we're getting it on our own separate, but they're not getting it separate. They're working close with the military at Fort Ord. And remember, a long time ago on 60 Minutes, they had the Nazis at Fort Ord. That may be one of the 60 reasons why Jesse Helms and the powers that be want Dan Rather off of CBS, because certainly that's not a liberal station. But he has talked about Colonial Dignidad or Klaus Barbie and some of the Nazi connections and the Nazis at Fort Ord. And if the Nazi money goes from the Order and the Aryan Nations to North Carolina to Jesse Helms' country, you can be sure that some of the 23 million or more that put Jesse Helms in to be reelected came from the support of the Nazi and Klan in North Carolina. But there are these two groups, one that stays in the business and has the support and travels to all the states and many countries, has the highest honors in the nation, is a sheriff at Monterey County, has mastered all the skills of business and communication. And one of the members of the Aryan Nation, the order up there, living in Salinas, William Soderquist, I wonder how close he is or if he knows the National Socialist Vanguard in Salinas. That's why I tried to find his number in the book to see if I could locate him. I'll try to the U.S. Attorney Bob Ward when they get through testifying in court in Seattle. Now I'm anxious to read the papers to see what he says happened to the order in Seattle, because a member of that group in Salinas is right in my backyard here, literally in our backyard in this area. And they've been there a long time, but thanks to the trial now, the connections are getting clearer and more names are being added, and the networking of these people is becoming easier to chart out with the help of what evolves even in a very limited press. Well, my time is out now. I'll be back with you next week to maybe update some of those other stories and continue with the trial of the Aryan Nations and get into the Rajneesh and some of these terrible scandals that do involve mass suicides, mass poisoning of the population, food poisoning, and other threats that they are talking about having the capability of doing, and they've been experimenting on. In the meantime, you take care, and I'll be back with you. Thanks again for all the articles and clippings. This is Mae Brussell